would not say that Stalin was worse than Hitler. You're never going to get me to agree on that.
The atrocities committed by communism led to the Red Scare. It's a reactionary movement.
Yeah, but they're still working with unions. Still
right, but they don't
doing
have the influence that you're trying to
give me
spread.
a point then.
Hello and welcome to Platinum Politics. I'm your host Mace, and it is debate night. Tonight's debate night topic: who was worse, Nazis or communists? On the side saying Nazis were worse, we have PrestoPuma, and on the pro-communist were worse side, we have another prominent member in the server, ongodilovewater. But without further ado, I'm going to shut up. It is debate night.
Yeah, I think it's because, like, everyone here has, like, an opinion on this because, like, we got so many tankies and we got so many capitalists and everything who are just bitter towards communists.
I'm gonna admit, like, half my policy is just anti-communism. I'm literally like MacArthur. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, that's a bit of a problem.
A little bit.
I'm going to insert the clip of you saying, Jarvis, get his exact location and contact Senator McCarthy. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Platinum Politics Debate Night. Tonight, we have the topic, who was worse, Nazis or communists? And on the Nazis were worse side, I guess is what we're going to call it, we have Puma.
Yep.
And then on the communists were worse side, we have On God I Love Water.
Oh, yeah.
So I think we'll just go ahead and do easy 4 minutes for the opening statements, 4 minutes for the rebuttals, and then we will go from there. Sound good?
Yep.
All right. Does anyone particularly want to have the floor first?
I'm fine either way.
Yeah, I could do it. I could start.
All right, you go ahead, Puma.
Alright, so, hello, this is PrestoPuma and Water. We were the first video. Hopefully I could do better than last time by not, like, being as condescending or yelling or just plain dick. This is hopefully a redemption arc. With this discussion, we hope to, while whether or not we convince each other is irrelevant, because this is more of a subjective take. However, I do believe that, in my personal opinion, Nazis were far worse, for multiple reasons that I will state throughout this entire discussion. Those, we'll go over a list of points of, say, based upon deaths, based upon the amount of damage they've done, the amount of discourse they've had, and their legacy, which is what we'll be covering throughout this discussion. And I believe the Nazis had more of a damaging impact on culture. I believe they were much more evil in comparison. I believe they had much more eviler intent. I believe the damage they have done is irreparable, and they are still a constant threat, even to society now. So, now, don't get me wrong, both sides are bad, especially if you take into account of the type of communists that, like, have been seen throughout history, whether it be the Soviet Union, China, or what have you. They have been bad, but I just believe that Nazis just tend to be worse, and I believe the same for On God I Love Water, to say the same about Nazis. He just believes that communists are worse. And hopefully I could either dissuade him, or at the very least get him to see my point of view. That's it for my opening statement.
Alrighty, and now Water, you can have the floor. 4 minutes.
Alright, my position is, following the first debate, who was worse? I would say, objectively, the communists have been worse throughout history. It is a lot easier to take that into account when you consider that the Nazis only had power in Germany for not even 20 years. I don't think fascism has even been a relevant movement in Europe or the United States or really any Western power since World War II, considering the massive denazification campaign we underwent after 1945. But communism has had a lot longer to fester and cause more harm to society than Nazism ever had the opportunity to. As stated before, obviously both sides in this debate are pretty bad, right? Nazis and communists are both pretty bad.
Right.
But objectively, I think it comes down when you account for the Holodomor, you account for the Great Leap Forward, all of these events that happened throughout communist countries. All of these events, like, far outweigh the Holocaust, despite how terrible that was, even. That would be my main point of contention here in this debate. I think it's, when we talk about policy, sure, Nazism is definitely worse, with the intent being worse as well, but the premise is who was worse, in terms of their actual ability and their legacy. So, yeah.
Alrighty, now we're going on to the rebuttals, and Puma, I'll give you the start here.
Okay, so I had a response prepared for, like, what your first point was. What was your first point again?
The first point is, by and large, that communists killed more people because they had a lot longer time to do it. They've had a lot longer in terms of, like,
No, wait, there
power.
was something before that. I think it was that, like, how there isn't anything, like, they haven't, we haven't had any fascist movements in recent in
any
a long
any
time in
like
the Western civilization.
any
Well,
like
that is
relevant ones, of course, right?
technically
Like
true.
yeah.
You could also make that same claim for communists, because most communist countries have always happened in eastern places. Actually, I would also say there's a much more fascist movements here than there are eastern places. For instance, there are plenty of Nazis that exist and hold power within our governments. If you take into account of like currently with the Elon Hitler salute and whatnot, Nazis doing a Nazi salute. You got also different Nazis and such. Also, current countries like Russia have actual Nazis in their government who work for the Kremlin and whatnot. And regardless of how you feel about Russia, they are no longer communists, but they are in fact pretty fucking fascists in nature.
That's true, but the argument isn't about fascism versus communism. It's Nazism versus communism.
That is also true.
It's
But like I said, we have Nazis that are influencing the Russian government.
I can agree with that, surely, and I would say the same thing for communists in America as well. That's one of my big problems with the Democrat Party is that
but
sometimes,
hold on.
yeah,
What communists are in power in America?
there are no communists in power, just like how there are no Nazis in power. There are fascists.
No, there are Nazis in power in Russia.
Can you name one Nazi? Like, there's fascists, sure, but I don't know if there's any Nazis per se in Russia.
I could look it up for you, but I do remember specifically that there are, in fact, Nazis who hold sway in power in Russia. Like, I mean, I guess you could say that they're, like, I feel like if I look it up, I'd also have to look up if there's communists who hold sway and power in Russia, which I think we could just both get, which we could both just say, like, is both true. I don't think, like, I don't want to have to look that up right now.
Russia is also a fairly...
There's both in there.
Right, Russia's a pretty, like, complicated mess. It still hasn't recovered from the 90s. It's wild.
Right. So, yeah, I don't want to do that just yet.
Okay.
Also, you got to take into account there are plenty of Nazis here who have even run for office and work within the Republican Party. Do you deny that or not?
No, I wouldn't deny that, but I would counter that and say that communists have also been running the Democrat Party. There's a reason why the Communist Party just now reemerged like last year.
Taken office.
Well, I mean, how many Nazis have actually taken office?
Well, we've had plenty of people who are neo-Nazis who actually worked under Trump.
I mean, work under, yeah. I'm sure there's plenty of communists that work under Trump. I mean, like, any government employee can count as
part
that.
of his administration.
Well, like, who would come to mind first?
Well, there was that one guy who was doing the, like, if you take into account all the white supremacists and whatnot who engage in that sort of speak, then there's again, Elon Musk doing the Nazi salute, and also basically is currently, like, downsizing a lot, is currently working in Doge. I would say Elon Musk is a good Nazi sympathizer at the very least.
I mean, I can agree with that. Yeah, he's a Nazi sympathizer. I won't call him a Nazi directly because even though he goes like the Nazi salute and shit,
not a Nazi directly, but again, the fact that he has Nazi influence in him.
I mean, yeah, sure, but I mean, I wouldn't make that large of a step. I don't think it's that emphasizable. There's plenty of things to criticize Elon about, yeah.
The Red Scare literally limited any sort of influence that communists have in this country to the point where pretty much any communist movements are not taken seriously. There are technically communist movements happening in Europe. I can see that to a degree, but even then, still not nearly as much as I would say fascism or Nazism. However, I do want to extend an olive branch because we also got to take into account. I do kind of want to take this into a point that one thing I want to do this gradually. I don't want to spoil that trump card yet. Also, you got to take into account. Actually, you know what? I'm going to let you respond. I'm going to let you respond first.
Okay. My response to that would be that, sure, even though Elon has these, like, Nazi influences, it's not major enough to call his policy Nazistic, right? So, like, even though, like, obviously what he's doing is he's consolidating power in the federal. I think we could both agree, or not the federal, the executive branch. I think we'd agree with that. I wouldn't necessarily call it Nazistic.
I wouldn't say his policy is Nazistic, but he does give rise to Nazism in the sense that, like, he is encouraging Nazis. And we've had, like, plenty of them raid the Capitol during January 6th. Do you deny that?
No, I'm not going to deny that.
You said true. Okay, so yeah, you don't deny that.
Right.
Now, keep in mind, I'm not saying, like, that there's no communist influence here. Like, you gotta take account of the Kremlin, who basically, I'm not sure whether or not you would consider them a communist movement. I know I don't particularly, but they do have influence in this country. Also, we got to take account of China. China is a communist movement, and they have very done bad things. So I got to extend an olive branch on that front.
Yeah, I I could agree with that. Especially Chinese influence in America, it's kind of crazy how like we aren't really very vigilant on like the home front and a lot of this stuff. It only has been like the past 8 years where we've really started to investigate Russian influence in our society. It's crazy. I don't think we fully understand the extent of foreign influence in America. I don't know how far it extends personally, so I'm not going to make any claims that either party would be influenced by communism, but I would say that there definitely are communist movements popping up. I have this is just an anecdote.
Yeah, you also got to take into account that like we're having enough time trying to get progressive like ideas just going through the Democratic Party, okay? Like, but there are plenty of far right people on the like we got Marjorie Taylor Greene in the Republican Party, so it's granted that's white supremacy more along those lines, but still.
I mean, to be fair, Marjorie Taylor Greene isn't a Nazi per se. And
Yeah,
even
that's why I said I specifically said white supremacy. That's
Right.
that's a different category than Nazi.
But even with these radicals in the Republican Party, we still have like
a less extreme.
right, like even with that, we still have these large sects of the Republican Party that still support Israel, for example, right? Even though they're white supremacists, they'll still support nations that are run by minorities and stuff like that.
Okay,
There's obviously a split. It's a controversial issue, but yeah.
No. I want to say on that, like, I have seen Nazis in support of Israel saying that we support Israel. They should stay there. We should get all the Jews over there, away from us, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
And also, you gotta take into account that, like, recent years, Muslims have become more of a target, and that's on both fronts. But that also is a point against communists because, well, China's currently doing a cultural ethnic cleansing.
Right, of the Uyghurs, yeah.
So that's another point in anyone's favor.
I think that also would feed into my thing, that there are active genocides happening right now under communist regimes, whilst Nazism doesn't have the power that it used to have, obviously, in Europe.
And that's why I want to get into something a bit. When you, like, you mentioned how many more deaths have happened under communism, which is technically true, yeah. Well, not technically, it is true. But you also got to take into account the fact that the only reason that happened is because we had to immediately deal with, like, the Nazi Party here. Like, they were not allowed to exist. We went immediately to war with them. Well, for obvious reasons. But still, like, they were snuffed out by the rest of the world because they were just that much more of a threat than the Communist Party. We even worked with communists against the Nazi Party.
Oh, sure, but that would make the question, who would have been worse, Nazis or communists, right? We're talking about who, like, was worse. I would like to take that rabbit hole sometime with you, but I don't think it's particularly relevant to this debate.
That's not a statement. They were objectively worse. We worked with communists because they were that much worse. We could not afford them. We could afford communists to stay around, but we had to deal with Nazis at the time because they were just that much more. They were actively doing stuff. They were actively doing things that would literally go against everything we stand for and whatnot. Plus, then there were still the Nazis that were literally still holding sway and, like, you know, like skinhead movements and whatnot, even among public. So, and they still have things up to this day. Well, but yeah, I mean, like we had to deal with Nazis. They were just that much. They were just that bad.
Wait, do you know why specifically the Western Allies went to war with the fascists in Germany?
Well, the fascists in Germany, the reason they went to war with, we know why Europe did, because they were literally being invaded by every fucking...
Right, okay.
And the reason the Americas did was because, one, they were our allies, and two, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, which essentially, and they were allied with Germany at the time. So obviously, yeah, like that's why we went to war. That doesn't discount the fact that they were still worse, and we still went to war with them. Like, we weren't aiding against communists during that time necessarily. And remember, we were allied with the Soviet Union at the time. So, I mean, like, because they were just that much worse. Also, communists also... Well, actually, no, I'm going to let you respond first, and then I'm going to get to my next point about that.
Okay. The thing about us supporting communists during World War II to fight fascism, that's only halfway true. It's not like a half truth, half lie. It's just there's the other half of it where in Asia You have the communist movement in China, which we directly avoided giving funding to. We actually supported the nationalist movement in China that was fighting the communists before the massive war broke out, or, with the Marco Polo Bridge incident. So, it's accurate to say that we teamed up with communists to fight the Axis, but it's more accurate to say we teamed up with people to fight a common enemy, right? Because immediately afterwards, remember, we have the very tense Cold War.
But that is still, I'd then make the argument that we're choosing the lesser of two evils.
I agree with that. I would agree. I think we could both agree that if Nazi Germany was allowed to continue onwards, or even if we had swapped the positions, right, where communism's only big in Germany, and Nazism's bigger in all the communist countries, you would see a much higher death toll in the now Nazi countries, right? But again, the problem is who was worse, right?
Yeah. And I would argue there's a few more points I could go over, like, for instance, the Holocaust, which was a near eradication of an entire ethnic group. Granted, we still have certain genocides under the Communist Party. I think you can probably list them better than I could, but the idea is that they were trying to succeed in it, and pretty much did displace a lot of people and caused the biggest amounts of deaths among the Jewish population than ever in history.
That's true. That is true. I would grant you that, but at the same time, if we were to grant that, we also have to grant that communist countries have also been on quests to expel a certain ethnic group, the Ba'ath Party.
I just would argue that they haven't been as big of an impact as the Nazis had on the Jewish population.
Yeah, but I would argue that there is a really close runner-up, which is the Arabs with the Ba'ath Party. When I say Arabs, just to clarify, it's not racially Arabs. Whenever I talk Israel-Palestine, it's the Arab armies around them, or the Arab population, just because before the nations were created, it was truly an ethnic thing.
Then they'd have to argue. Then I would have to argue that American capitalists have also done that. Technically, not by choice, not with the intent to do so, but they have.
Well, I mean, yeah, without the intent to, yeah, but with the Ba'ath Party, it was explicit, right? This is why the slogan of the Houthis is "Death to Israel, Allah is great, death to Jews," right? Not just death to Israel, it's just the Jews in America. And some will happen. The Jews were almost eradicated in 1948 and 67. I don't want to get too deep into it.
Point too much about about what the Arabic population is against, because I don't think we want to turn this into a whole.
Right,
we want to keep this between communists and Nazis.
Right, fair. But my main point with that was that the Ba'ath Party was communist, or it was a form of communism.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. You're probably right. I don't know too much, so I'm just gonna take your word for it on that. But again, that's still a runner-up comparatively.
Right.
Also, you have to contend, and I'm gonna bring this up. You're probably not going to like this, but you also have to take into account the amount of good that came from both movements. I can't personally think of any good that came from Nazis, but I can think of plenty of really good movements that came from communists.
Yeah,
for instance,
that come from communists, sure, but come from communist countries, no.
For instance, did you know that a lot of the civil rights leaders were communist or had communist leanings at the very least?
Yeah, I disagree with them on those. The communist
I disagree with them too on those, but during that time, they did have, a few of them were Maoist, from Fred Hampton to even the most pinnacle we have, which is Martin Luther King Jr.
I mean, yeah, he was communist in the sense that he didn't believe in the American dream as we did. He believed in the idea that people can be successful under the American system, but the only problem is that you have to modify the American system to a point where it's no longer like the original American dream, right?
A few of them were actually, Fred Hampton himself was a Maoist and everything, and I think there were some leanings that you could make an argument for Martin Luther King Jr.
I mean, sure, but if we grant that, then I guess one thing that Nazism was good for. I'm not Christian in the first place, so I mean, it isn't necessarily good for me. But a lot of people would argue that upholding Christian values is a fairly good thing, and that is something that Nazism reinforced a lot.
Okay, hold on. Upholding Christian values is not something you want to do. That's just in favor of a religion. That's not necessarily doing good.
Christian values are not inherently bad. You
I don't
recognize
think they're
that.
inherently
Right?
bad, but that's a neutral point. That's what I'm saying. It's a neutral point. It's not a good point. It's a neutral point.
That's, I mean, upholding important, like, core cultural values is not a bad thing.
Hold on.
Of course, the way they implemented doing that would be bad,
Upholding
but yeah.
core cultural values. I'm not Christian. You're not. I don't believe you are.
No,
Are you?
no.
So then why would you bring up Christian values as a good point?
Because Christian values are fairly good, because they're mainly they're mainly rooted in humanism. Humanism is this idea.
That those Nazis who believe in those Christian values don't actually apply those same Christian values, the actual good parts of the Christian values, really?
Yeah, no, totally. They construed it just like how the slavists did in America.
You also got to take into account that the Catholic Church was in fact in favor of Nazism in the sense that they gave money to them.
Yeah,
it's
messed up.
That's why.
To be fair, I think to contextualize that, a lot of people didn't know about the Holocaust until we actually went into the camps. Like the Nazi Party, literally, if you look at the propaganda videos of it, like, hold on a minute, really quick. Like they knew about the camps. They didn't know they were concentration camps. Like there used to be, I watched like a bunch of propaganda videos that they produced.
Of the Catholic Church. Just want to make that clear. Also, remember the Catholic Church was in Italy. They would have had more information on that stuff than like we did.
That's true, but even the German population didn't even know about it. Like, as far as they knew, it was literally like a little vacation. People were actually jealous of the Jews.
Come on, don't be.
No, I'm so serious. If you look at the propaganda videos, they literally had days where they would open a swimming pool and they would force the Jews to look happy. They would force them to look happy. They'd give them all these nice clothes. They would make it look like it was perfect. And then, like, oh, look at the Jews. They're so spoiled. Haha, we're just gonna lock them away. Whatever.
Wait, hold on. Do you really expect me to believe that the population of Germany believe that though?
Yes. There are literally diaries of people who, like, in 1940 and 1939 were like, I wish I was in the Jewish camp. Maybe they're gonna have a shortage of food.
Wait, if that's the point, then you would try to make a claim that you were said Jewish. Who try to oppose as Jews in order to get into those camps if they were that jealous?
Hold on. Can you restate that real quick?
I said, if that's the case, then wouldn't people have tried to like pose as Jewish in order to be go on those vacations or even get out of conscription?
No, because the reason that they didn't is because they wanted to maintain that German character. The whole point was that, okay, well, we're going to satisfy the Jews by putting them in these like little vacation homes, and in the meantime, we're going to make not America. I was thinking of MAGA. We're going to make Germany great.
If this is true, then that's a point in my favor because of how deceitful they were in posing and how much like sinister it was.
I mean, yeah, the communists did this too, though, so it's a neutral point.
No, it's not a neutral point. It's because like they were trying to eradicate somebody, and they were literally doing it in the most insidious way possible.
Right, and communists were doing it.
I want to throw something in here just to kind of keep it going. I've been doing a lot of research about North Korea recently, just because it's curious to me. The labor camps and that kind of setup. Could you not compare Nazi Germany to that? You know, there's a question to throw out there to keep the conversation going. And they're like religiously communist, indoctrinated, obviously.
What do you mean by labor camps? Wait, we're talking about the labor camps in Nazi Germany or what?
Well, yeah,
concentration camps are labor camps.
You guys were talking about the labor. Yeah, there's little differences between them, but they have those kinds.
There is a significant difference between a labor camp that is imposing against, like, just those undesirable, like in communism, versus like literal gas chambers being built and torture chambers.
Well, those aren't concentration camps; those are death camps. There's a difference.
Yeah, they tend to send like Americans and like any.
Don't get me wrong; it's still bad, but there's a significant.
But my question was more: could you not compare the two? Because one is a communist system, one is a Nazi system. I'm just curious.
I would argue. If we were to compare, I would have to say the communist ones were probably nowhere near. Well, sorry, not nowhere near. We're not as bad as the Nazi Jewish concentration camps.
No, I would say so in gulags.
I would fundamentally have to disagree with that.
I would have to agree with that because one of the weird things about communists, labor camps and concentration camps and death camps, is that a lot of the times you still have to worship the leader who's imprisoning you, which is incredibly ironic. It's a form of mental torture in its own. Like, there are tons of birthday cards that Gulag workers would have to send to Stalin, for example, despite the fact that he's the reason they're in those camps, and he's the reason that they're suffering, just based off of a trade they can't even change, right? Like, the difference between communism and Nazism, in terms of the camps, is that the communist camps were just covered up. Or they weren't, and if they weren't covered up, they were just said, "Oh, well, that's because they're enemies of the state." And Nazism is just their tool.
Yes, I don't deny that's bad, but you have to make an argument that that's still that's somehow worse than genocide.
I mean, it's a form of genocide in its own, but yeah,
not just a regular genocide, but one specifically designed to eradicate Jews.
I mean. In this, it doesn't have to be Jews, though, for example. Like, in this case, it could be the Uyghur Muslims, or it could be the minorities in the Caucasians mountains, like the Chechen Muslims.
Oh, yeah, we can compare that. But, I'd still say it's not as bad. And here's why. It's still incredibly awful. Please do not...
I'm not here for the sound bites.
I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the audience. Don't do me like that. But, let's be honest. The extremities are current, that we know of at the very least right now, are not nearly as bad. Right now, it's just a matter of re-education and cultural ethnic cleansing. It's not nearly the same as genocide. Because that's
still a genocide, though. That's a form of genocide.
Well, it is a form of it. It's not nearly to the same extreme. They're trying to remove the culture, not necessarily kill all the people and whatnot. And again, we have to, there just aren't that many in comparison. Plus, you gotta take into account that the weaker Muslims are oh god, I'm starting to feel really unspotting in this. I don't know where I was going with that last point, but continue.
Okay, so the re-education point is that's a genocide in its own. We'd agree on that. It's not the same. It's not the same.
Genocide is
right. I would rather be I'd rather be re-educated than be just killed immediately, right? Those are obviously two different situations.
That's the point in my favor, then.
No, I mean, yeah, if we were just to leave it right there, sure, but you're ignoring that there are also genocides that happen that were explicitly.
I'm not saying it's not a genocide. I'm not saying it's not a genocide. I'm saying that it's not as bad as the genocide that happened in Germany.
Well, there are genocides that happen explicitly for the purpose of removing a population, like the kulaks, right? A lot of the time, the Ukrainian kulaks after Lenin took power, a lot of the time they were just killed. They weren't re-educated. A lot of times they were just shot.
Okay, yeah, that's true. That is true. The Ukrainians did have to go through that.
It's just to say a lot of it's re-education is ignoring all the ones that weren't re-education.
We were specifically talking about. I wasn't talking about re-education in terms of every genocide that's happened. I'm talking explicitly about the Uyghur Muslim genocide.
Oh, I mean, well, yeah, we could agree partially on that. The extent of it also is still...
The genocide that happened in Ukraine is a completely different thing.
Well, it's also because we have more documentation on it.
Much more closer to the Holocaust.
Right. It's hard to also, look at the Uyghur one right now, just because we don't have the documentation for it explicitly.
On it.
Right, we have a lot of information right now, but it's not going to be nearly as much as we know 20 years from
now. To say whether or not it's as bad as that. We just don't have enough.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Don't get me wrong, it's very bad, but it's not nearly the same. Well, that's right. It's not. We don't have enough information to know whether or not it's the same.
Okay, I honestly kind of want to see how this. I'm gonna try and ask this question again, because I feel like we're honestly agreeing a lot, which is kind of a good thing. The camps, right? We have Nazi labor camps, concentration camps. We have North Korean communist quotation marks.
I think I kind of want to move, if I may. I think I kind of want to move back to whether or not one has done good or the other. Because don't get me wrong, we could go back and forth on the camps all day. I feel like that's just going to be a bit too subjective at that point. Because again, you're going to be hitting me with they've committed more genocides versus me who's saying that the genocides that were committed by the Nazis had a greater impact. So I think it would probably be best.
Well, I mean, yeah, could you not explain how that happened? How it did cause a greater impact?
Well, sure. For instance,
and I just want to throw this out here because Gravemind is saying it in the chat. The USA also did have concentration camps of themselves. Whatever.
Yeah, but that's
isn't that comparable, but okay.
It's not comparable. It's not comparable to either. Because, we did have concentration camps in the sense that, we did that with the Japanese, but they were not killed, for one. They were not dissuaded from their culture. They were just imprisoned. Still bad. Very, very bad. It's one of our darkest parts of our history. Well, I would say like medium side when you compare it to like slavery or something like that. But it's not nearly the same as the labor camps that happened in communism, and nowhere near close to the death camps in Germany.
Right.
Like that's just a whole different fucking ballpark. Also, they were allowed to come back. that's another thing. They were not left starving. They were not nowhere near as badly as like the labor camps or they were treated better.
Right, like it was a security measure, which I don't agree with it, obviously. But that's the justification.
But that's not comparable in this sense.
Yeah, just to get back to the original thing, like, why do you think that Nazi ones were more impactful, like overall, compared to communist genocides?
Well, because we go over them so often in history. We have literal documents about how it was enacted. We have various strains on like how it is. The fact that like there's still impact. They have still the impacts are felt to this day of like just in great immensements. They wiped out more of this population than any other than like anything the communists have done. There's too many. There's a lot of factors. I could literally just point to a Holocaust museum and say, yeah, all of this. Do we have anything comparable to that?
We do. Like in Ukraine, like I'm going to keep bringing it up because the Holodomor is probably one of the more documented ones in communist history. But the Holodomor, we have
to be honest, I need you to kind of educate me on like the genocides that happened in communist
Okay, I'm gonna admit I'm a little biased here because again I'm anti-communist, so I'm not very forgiving when it comes to that.
I feel like you're anti-communist. Communism is kind of factoring in too much here.
I'm gonna try to give like the most unbiased explanation I can. In the 1920s, after the Civil War, obviously there was a lot of like destruction in Russia due to the Civil War, just because of the nature of it and how it went down. And a lot of wheat fields were destroyed during the Civil War. But on top of the already low production of wheat that was happening in Ukraine, there ended up being a natural disaster. I think it was a drought, and that really fucked it up, right? You kind of have like Great Depression, like the Dust Bowl situation going on. But the problem here, and the reason why most people call it a genocide, is because the Communist Party was taking resources away from the affected regions because they didn't trust the Ukrainians. They didn't believe them as real comrades or something like that. It does require a lot of research and nuance, but yes, that is the gist of it.
Isn't that the same as what Winston Churchill did to India?
Yeah, we could both agree that Winston Churchill was an awful person who did that, but he wasn't a Nazi.
Yeah. Well, I know. I'm not saying that's another point in favor of Nazism. I'm just saying, isn't that comparable to that? Like, actually, it's
fairly comparable, actually. Yeah,
if I'm being completely honest.
Or even the average potato famine. It's comparable to that as well.
Yeah, that it also sounds like that. Yes. So, I'm not saying it's necessarily a point in my favor. I'm just saying that sounds exactly like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very similar situation. The British Empire is obviously not the greatest. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's not. Like just for my understanding, I'm comparing it.
That's about it.
But how is that worse than the Holocaust?
I believe the death toll was. At least, if not comparable, it was even exceeding. I can look up some estimates.
It's not just about like how many people died. It's about like the impact it had on the population to the lesser extent.
Oh, sure, yeah. Ignoring even the death counts, like the impact this had on Ukrainian history and the culture is immense, right? The communist repression of Ukrainian culture is even felt today, right? This is why Ukraine kind of struggles to have a national character before the Russian invasions in 2014. There's this really good quote. I fail to remember it right now, but it's this Ukrainian soldier. He's like, before the invasion, we didn't have a Ukraine. We have multiple people claiming to be from sections of Ukraine. But now we have Ukrainians, right? So before you'd be like Crimean or you would be from Kyiv. Now you're just Ukrainian, right? That's the war unified them and is kind of giving them a national identity that they didn't have before because communism really messed that up for them. And these repressions, including the Holodomor, are events in that larger history of Ukrainian suppression.
So what you described was the Holodomor earlier with the famine and whatnot.
Right, the Holodomor, it's an event in
Okay,
this larger
I
thing.
don't know. I just want to make sure I'm clarifying.
You're good. No, you're good.
Okay, so I hate to do this. I hate to do this. I really don't like comparing like one genocide being worse than another, but like I guess that's what we're doing because we have to, because
Right.
that's the whole point. But like, yeah, this is why I didn't want to stick to this portion of the debate. But the idea wasn't that it just affected, like, remember, you also got to take into account of how the Holocaust literally caused us to have a whole Zionist movement in that of Israel, which helped create the current conflict in Israel versus Palestine. Yes, this was a war that was already happening, but it was helped to be exasperated and creating a far right movement. Like, it's a whole thing. But like, again, like, that's how bad it was that Jewish people felt like they had to, like, govern themselves and literally go to a different country from across the world because they just felt like they were being persecuted to that extent. And like which technically they were. I mean, the Holocaust is pretty much that, but yeah, like that's just it. That was the one that set fire to it all. And we still have people saying that we have the Jewish question still being presented today as a thing.
Hold on.
Before we get into what you're saying, I just want to go over what Gravemind just directly talks to me. Also, the Nazis exterminated the Gypsies. The Gypsies were a big religion before Nazi Germany, but after World War II, it became a religion that doesn't exist anymore. You cannot forget this.
No, I don't think Gypsies are a religion necessarily.
They are, well, I wouldn't say they're a religion. I think they're like
they're an ethnic group.
They're an ethnic group, but that's still a point in my favor.
It is, yeah. I could agree with that, yeah. I mean, it's still like we'd agree the Holocaust describes the Jewish genocide, but there's that genocide overall includes a lot more people, like the Slavic people.
That is true. It includes a lot more people, and again, that's just more in my favor at that point.
Right, I could concede that, yeah. But still, yeah. First of all, just really quick to address the Zionism thing. That's not why Zionism kicked off. Israel, but it exists like far beyond that.
You're right. It did exist well before. I want to backpedal on that. It did exasperate the thing. I do believe
it did. It definitely accelerated it. Sure.
Yeah, it accelerated.
I would agree. I would say that it's inevitable. The existence of an Israeli state in the region is probably inevitable.
Oh yeah.
But no, we could totally agree that it accelerated it. Right. It definitely was this big moment of panic.
Yeah, to a point of panic. That's why we have so many people that moved from around the world to it.
Well, there also is a factor that a lot of Jews living in Europe now had nowhere to live because their houses were either sold to Germans or they were destroyed. So now there's more incentive to push. Right? There's more of a push.
My argument now.
I mean, sure, you can talk about
because of the Nazis.
I mean, to be fair, a lot of the destruction is also caused on like the Eastern Front. A lot of even Dresden is a result of the war, which was requested by Stalin. The bombing of Dresden is very rarely remembered as that, but it was requested by Stalin because of the Battle of Bucharest. It's a really interesting dynamic.
Because they were fighting the Nazis, so it comes to both parties taking into account of that. So again, I would say that the Nazis were primarily a result of that, or even like with that particular thing, you have to give even ground at that point for the bombings and whatnot. Because they were literally fighting the Nazis. Either way, the Nazis played a part in like the displacement of Jews in that region.
I mean, sure, yeah, of course. I would say that Nazism is probably the biggest negative impact on the Jewish community. But for example, some communities have literally just been eradicated because of communism. One of them would be a lot of them in the Caucasians, which it pains me that I don't remember a lot of them off the top of my head. Because they are extremely small ethnic groups, just because of how the Caucasus is
you're doing better than
situated.
I would.
Yes.
So, don't beat yourself up too hard. I don't think most people, even in the audience, are gonna know.
No, it's sad because a lot of the communist genocides are just forgotten, or if they're not forgotten, they're just irrelevant. Sadly, especially as an American, there is no education about Russia really in American education systems until we get to the Cold War.
That's because of the Red Scare. Red Scare had a massive impact, which isn't really a point in favor of you as much as it is a point against the capitalist Americas that happened.
I don't know. I think it could be just talking about the impact of it.
I'm not gonna let you put the the Red Scare as a point against communism at that point, because that's a completely different thing.
Well, the atrocities committed by communism led to the Red Scare. It's a reactionary movement.
It's a reaction to it, but I would have to say that's a point against capitalist ideals.
I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, like you have,
or like American exceptionalism or something like that, or like American policies at the time. Yes, well, like you can make an argument that it was a reaction to that, but that's just like an economy. Sorry, that's a system trying to protect itself from another system. It's not necessarily the fault of communism as much as it is just the fault of like how we behaved, and also
well, a lot of
the itself bad.
Like the Red Scare it's influenced by a lot of things. Obviously, communism is a very new political movement in this time period, but on top of that, it's against American values. So already people are less likely to accept it. But then you get this really big thing where there's a bunch of refugees coming in from Russia, because remember, the White Army controls like the east of Russia until the communists push them out.
I want to backtrack. Yeah. What do you mean it's against American values? Like, what about communism is against American values?
So American values typically involve like individualism and like self-reliance, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you can become successful through materialism.
Not necessarily an American value.
I would say so. Yeah, that's a pretty American. That's a pretty American value. Like if you talk about like the settlers, like sure it is. Yeah.
No. You're thinking of independence as a form is an American value. Pulling yourself up by your bootstraps is a mischaracterization of something that people use to basically harm like unions and whatnot. It's not an American value. We used to not have like these whole like this idea. We used to have like things like social programs and whatnot, but that all ended because of the Red Scare. That's like it was basically just an excuse to attack unions as well as like any political political enemies of whoever was running the establishment. That's not necessarily an American value. I would not say that. No.
That's an incredibly narrow view of it. Like, if from like socialist history, of course, that is true, right? But that's been used since like the beginning of the Americas.
I would attribute a lot of the union representations as well as workers' rights and class consciousness to that of communism.
Yeah, you're in a very like narrow, like a lot of it's progressivism in the 1800s.
A lot of the movements did take place because of communists.
No, not really. Yes. Just in the 1800s, no, not at all. It was progressives.
Wait. When do you think communism became a thing?
So communism isn't like the Marxian idea of communism, or like abstract communist ideals that happened beforehand.
Either.
So. Abstractly, communism has been a thing since the beginning of time, but the Marxian idea of communism comes around. It becomes really popular like the 80s and the 90s, like the 1880s and 1890s. That's like the largest time I would see it in the Marxian system. Yeah,
that's still pretty long. Like that's a lot of like the unions reps and such happened during those times.
But it also exists a lot before those times, like the $12 hour workday being decreased to 8 hours. That happened before, I think it was like in the 1860s or like 50s. Like a lot of these American like progressive like basic like fundamental ideals come before communism really starts to get treads in America. Because remember, in the 70s, 80s, and 90s,
those same people wound up being communists to a degree.
I mean, later on, sure, but they largely start as progressives working through a progressive movement for a progressive goal.
Right, but again, I would still attribute the class consciousness and whatnot to that of communism.
I fundamentally have to disagree with that. Just with the history of it, like the history of it, it just precedes communism. And instead of seeing like I think the way that you're viewing it is like it's like a sled that has like 1 pound of like movement behind it.
Gravemind also pointed out communism started in the Renaissance by the Catholic Church in terms of the word.
Potentially, I don't know much about that, but like the Marxian idea of communism comes around like the 80s, 90s, and the 1900s. Yeah, that's largely. I mean, there's like ideas before, like obviously like the churches, like the argument why churches aren't taxed is because they help the poor and stuff like that. Whether you agree with it or not, that's the justification for it. But yeah, like it's. I could totally believe that. I'm not educated on that.
I would feel like a lot of the union attacks were basically using communism as a scapegoat. So you can't really blame the attacks on unions because of communism.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't blame attacking unions on communism. That's definitely an oppressive thing to do.
Which I also would say, like, yeah, the Red Scare, you can't really necessarily blame it on communism since it was just used as a ploy to make communism a scapegoat.
Well, it was a scapegoat, but that only really starts to develop after it already starts to get moving. From my understanding, the Red Scare...
I'm very certain that was mostly made as a point, even from the start, that it was meant to as a ploy to basically harm other people and by using communism as a scapegoat.
Well, from my understanding, you know how, back to the example from earlier, the White Army holds like the East, so they have a port from there to California. And that's like they largely go to like Alaska, and then they come down to the mainland of the United States and Canada, and you hear these horror stories a lot of the time because these are Tsarist sympathizers, right? Many of these stories aren't true, but they are exaggerations of what happened in the Civil War, right? Like, oh, the burning churches thing definitely happened, but there's other things like massacres that may or may not have happened. They're obviously going to be biased because they're still sticking with the Tsarists. But that starts off because then you get all these Americans hearing like, oh my God, is this really what communism brings about? And then after that, a lot of political leaders really started to realize, hey, wait a minute,
was the American government singling out and targeting people in under the guise of communism to attack political adversaries.
You mean in the second Red Scare, like the 40s and 50s, 60s, or like the one during the 20s?
Both?
No, in the 20s, not necessarily. They were attacking people, but they were using it to discredit union movements. Sure, yeah, but they weren't like attacking people.
Adversaries. Yes, that was political adversaries. Yes,
well, that's because communism actually becomes a really big movement in like the 20s and 30s in the United States, like especially in West Virginia.
That doesn't dissuade. That's not a point against communists, though. That's a point against that. That is just a further point against like the.
It's a point of the origin of the Red Scare, though.
It's a point against the American government. I wouldn't say that communism is at fault for that.
I would say so. Like the treatment of the Civil War and everything like that. Yes.
You can't really blame communists for something that because I would also say that those same union workers who fought for rights during that time, who were communists, were actually doing good. Like it kind of like if that's the case, then you'd have to say that you'd have to give me the point that communists helped with unions at the time because
I would say a lot of union work back then is progressive more than communist, but yeah.
Well, no. Because if you're gonna make the claim that the communist movements were gaining ground at that time, and that they were because they were part of unions, then you have to give me that point.
Okay, wait. So you have these progressive movements that exist before communism comes to the United States, and then communism kind of hitchhikes off of that.
If communists help make up those people, that's a point in my favor.
But they're making a vast minority of these people.
Yeah, but they're still working with unions, so they're still doing
but they don't have the influence that you're trying to.
You have to give me the point then.
If there was a pie of influence that we could use to visualize this, communists and socialists would have 15% of the pie, and then progressives would have 85%.
It doesn't matter. What matters is that those communists are in fact doing good. Are they not?
It's largely the progressives, but I mean, sure.
It is largely the progressives, but they're part of the movement. You can't blame the communists in that movement.
I mean, sure, yeah. If we want to say that it's that the progressives were leading a lot of the civil rights stuff, when it comes to worker stuff, then yeah, sure. I don't see how that.
I'm not saying that they were leading the movement. I'm saying if they are part of a union, that means they're part of helping people. Because they were part of it, suddenly that should be a point against them. What?
It's not an argument against them. You're trying to frame these union arguments or these unions as largely communist like the 20s.
I'm saying the communists in the movement, the communists in the unions are not doing harm by being a part of that union.
I mean, yeah, I guess we could agree on that. I still would say that the Red Scare is as a result of the Soviets, at least, yeah. But still, yeah.
But even then, that's still, it kind of would cancel out if we're going to say, then you have to give me credit for communists being part of those movements. They were still doing good. They weren't doing, they didn't make up the majority of it, but the communists were still a part of it.
All right, I'm going to give you guys 5 seconds to keep doing what you're doing, and then I might see if anybody wants to get pulled up here to ask either of you fellas a question, and then we'll do that for a little bit, and then we can close off.
Yeah, okay, so like I'm just gonna
We could just do closings right now.
I'm
I'd be fine with
exhausted
it.
at that point in particular. I feel like I don't think we're gonna go very much anywhere else with that point. So yeah, I think there's a bunch of other things I could go into, I think, in terms of the other goods, like especially if you take into account the other civil rights movements that existed throughout history, are largely made up, like, at least during like the 1950s and 40s in this country. Like you can't tell me that communists like the amount of civil rights movements that were influenced by people who were either at the very least communist sympathetic to be a huge influence in like to today's world versus the Nazis who literally contributed nothing good. At least not a thing that I would imagine. I would love to hear any good thing. Like if you can like contribute any good thing that came from that like good, like, and you can't just say like in favor of a religion, like, because that's not really helping, because a religion is neither good nor evil at that point. You have to make an argument that that because of that it led to good things.
Societally, yeah, I think fascist or Nazism is definitely worse than theoretically wise, yeah. Nazism is going to be worse than
Yeah,
communism.
but what good effects have they had is what I want to ask.
They haven't, right? That's what I was getting at. Is that like societally, like in like the terms of like what their goals are, right? Nazis are by far worse, but in how history has played out, communists have had more opportunity to be worse because they've been around longer. That's just the fact of it.
Yeah, but that's because we had to wipe them out first. I would just go back to that.
Right, but we only wiped them out because they attacked everyone around them, which could be a point for your argument, sure, but if they didn't attack anyone, I don't know if we'd be having this discussion today.
Well, they were going to attack people because that's kind of what makes them Nazis. That's the problem.
Well, I mean, that's also what happened with communism in the early stages of it, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, but the fact that we can have like forms of like people will argue for forms of communism. Like we've had a lot of bad communists also. I don't think that that's necessarily a thing, but there are also a lot of good communists. That's kind of cancels itself to a different degree. Like it's like there are good, like people will argue that there are different forms of communism that exist outside of the Soviet Union that actively would be better off. At the very least, they do fight for rights that you and I both agree with and can agree with politically. I don't imagine you agreeing with anything when it comes to Nazis.
Yeah, that's pretty true. I would say I would align myself more with communism before I went with Nazism.
Oh, a communist, a communist, not communist.
Right, like a communist, yeah. But
because this is an argument about communism versus Nazism. This is an argument against Nazis or communists.
Right. Yeah.
There is a
I guess I would align myself more with like a communist, like a communist sympathizer before I sympathize with Nazis.
Communists than you would a Nazi.
I mean, yeah, but there's a reason why I also call myself an anti-communist instead of an anti-Nazi. Is because even though I'm anti-Nazi and I'm anti-communist at the same time, there's just isn't that much societal impact of Nazism.
Well, just to be clear. I'm just re-clarifying the arguments that, like, you know, it doesn't come across like you agree with communism or anything, because I know you would be against it.
Right. That's just
clarify. I'm just helping to clarify. I'm not trying to do a gotcha or anything.
Right.
Anyway, mate, did you have a final point to go off of, Water, or do you want to let people in?
No, I think we should let people in for a Q&A. I'd love to hear the gamers' thoughts here. Look in the chat, yeah.
All right. Is there anyone that wants to come up and ask a question? Because there is also a couple of questions here in the chat.
The hand and everything. Okay, I got a question from Grave Mind. Which do you think is better, socialism or communism? Well, I have yet to hear too many good arguments for how a communism would work, but I have heard a lot. I at one point identified as a socialist. I'm still like unsure about how socialism would work, but I have heard better arguments in favor of socialism than I have heard communism. But that's just because I'm uneducated on the subject. But yeah, I would say socialism is always going to be a factor of communism, but I wouldn't say communism is a factor of socialism. So right now, unless I hear better arguments for why communism would work, I would say I would agree more with socialism.
All right.
Yeah, that's pretty fair.
Anybody else have a question? Anyone want to come up?
There's a lot of
and
people typing, so I don't.
speak?
Let's see. False marks does not hold a memory. Okay, so there's a lot of like fighting each other in the comments section.
Yeah, no, there's been a little side debate in the chat.
Yeah, guys,
so-
guys, you're supposed to be.
Yeah.
What is your
questions.
favorite anime? Okay, Water, what is your favorite anime?
My favorite. I watch anime. I did watch like a few anime, like movies, but yeah, not really.
For me,
Big
it depends
anime
on a lot of different things. I think one of my favorite anime. Actually, yeah, I think I can answer that honestly. I think for me, it's Gintama.
Yeah, I want Gamer up here. I want to hear him. He's been talking crap in the comments about me, but
Yeah,
I
know
want
you got
Yeah,
questions.
get up
Come on.
here.
All right.
Like, well, let's
Throwing all this shade. Aye.
Can we get some Coca-Cola or lemonade or Pepsi? Come on, guys! Like, I know you guys have actual questions. You guys were
Coca-Cola,
fighting over
easy.
this for all day yesterday. You're telling me you guys got no questions for either of us? Are you kidding me that are related to the subject? Oh,
Do y'all think Nazism and communism should have the same amount of stigma from society? Ooh.
Okay, that's a great question. I would say no, because there are better forms of communism that can be seen with like under a good lens. I don't think there's any good that can come from Nazism, so I think there's like, and I think you would agree with me on that communism has more of a bearing on rationality than Nazism does, and should be met with less stigma.
Yeah, I think the question's a little weird, just because do y'all think Nazism and communism? I think a better question would be like, do y'all think Nazism and Marxist-Leninism, or like Stalinism, or like do you think fascism and communism should be the same? Because Nazism is like it's a sect of like fascism, you know, and like just how communism is like
Yeah, but you do
large
know
category.
communism gets lumped in with Stalinism. That's the problem.
Oh well, yeah, that's the most infamous example, yeah.
Yeah, because that's why it keeps getting lumped in. Like, that's why there's a huge stigma against communism, because it keeps getting lumped in with Stalinism. There's no way you can separate Nazism from Nazi Germany. Like, that's the whole point.
Right. Yeah, I think
That's why I think there should be less of a that they should not have the same stigma, nor should it be as bad for communism as it is for Nazism.
Yeah, okay, I could agree. The Nazism definitely deserves more stigma. Communism's like it's up there, but it's not up there as Nazism.
Hold on. Let me extend an olive branch. If we're going to say like, okay, if you think Stalinism should be met with as much scrutiny as Nazism, I could see an argument be made for that. Hell, might even agree with that. I hate
and we do have
more than anything.
We have a clarification in the comments. Sorry, I meant the people following the ideologies and also what y'all talk about. The people who follow it, ooh.
No, the people that follow
so.
it, and like again, I would still say the same thing, because again, we're talking about like, I guess it would come like, it depends on whether we're talking like an actual tanky who believes in Stalinism, or just somebody who has communist values but ultimately still agrees with those sentiments. I would still say Nazism is more of a threat to our country than communism is, in the sense that like it has more influence in our country, which is kind of bad. So I would say that, yeah, like Nazism is deserving more of a stigma, even among the people who are a threat to our country, than I would say communists are. Because like, I think you can agree that communists tend to have less power than Nazis in this country.
Yeah, I would say that if it's just between like Hitlerians and Stalinists, then I think Stalinists should get more stigma. But if it just the broad ideologies, yeah, no.
I'm not sure if I would agree with they should get more hate, like more scrutiny than Nazis. Like, you'd have to make a really good argument, because like,
yeah, I could do that. Yeah, real quick.
Yeah,
like Stalin is like he's literally Hitler, but just has more power and has more people to be under control of. He's paranoid. He's like delusional in the same way that Hitler is.
Well, yeah, but like again, we're talking about a guy who committed genocide. We're talking about like,
Stalin committed genocide too.
Well, yeah, okay.
Like
we're talking about the guy who literally led the Nazi movement, and versus like one person. Okay, I'm sorry. Like, I would not say that Stalin was worse than Hitler. You're never gonna get me to agree on that.
I think it's a ridiculous point to argue on. Like, I think it'd be fine if we both just agreed to disagree on that and then just like moved on. I think that's pretty fair.
Like,
it's just subjective.
Can we just say that they both deserve the same amount, at least?
Yeah, I could settle on that.
Okay.
All right,
like,
we agree.
To that point,
Stalin
I can't give you like
and Hitler are bad. We can both. We
All
can all agree
right.
that. and that seems to be our common ground.
What is your opinion on the bio-Leninist interpretation of the rise of communism? What? If you don't know what it is, I can elaborate in VC. Water, do you know what he's talking about?
I've never even heard of this. It sounds cool, I'm not gonna lie. I just don't know what it is.
Wait a minute, hold on. Isn't this the actual fact? I don't think I want to.
No, I don't know.
Right. So yes, that is me. Right. So the bio-Leninist interpretation of the rise of socialism essentially states that communism intentionally promotes the lowest of society to justify its own power. That is why we saw criminals, that is why we saw the most impoverished and the most socially outcast, especially within the Russian Revolution, be they ethnic, religious, or religious minorities, or being the lowest of the, socioeconomic classes. And because the lowest denominator of society is the basis of power of communism also doesn't incentivize, the conclusion of that is that communism also doesn't incentivize the growth of the socioeconomic class or the individual growth of the socioeconomic class, because it does not, because it lowers their power base. It lowers the numerical basis of their power block.
Okay, so I'm stupid. Water, can you please break that down in words I can understand?
Basically, communism incentivizes these really minor groups to rise up. So one of those examples would be criminals or ethnic minorities. They're not equating those two, but they're just giving examples of how those two are minorities that can be looked down upon in society, and how communism incentivizes those groups to rise up broadly. I would have to do more research on the theory. It does seem really interesting and complex, but yeah.
Wouldn't that be a good thing, I guess?
I mean, attracting criminals is not exactly my idea of success, but yeah.
Because if we're talking
no, it's not
criminals per se, I mean necessarily I would say because when I hear that, I think of how we disenfranchise those who have engaged in criminality, whether or not they have served their time or not.
It's not about
ex-cons are better rights.
Technically, yes, you are uplifting these people from the lower classes or the lower positions of society, but you're actually elevating them to a place of privilege where they do not deserve to be, because many of these people because many of these people, be they minorities, religious, ethnic, be they criminals, be they whatever, oftentimes got positions in a relatively high rank either within some government apparatus. And I mean, we know what communism was like within the Soviet Union. It was extremely bureaucratic, it was extremely bloated, and almost everyone was a party member for self-interest.
Well, okay, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, mostly under the guise that we can see that in Russia and in Soviet Union and China, the communist parties are made up mostly of people that represent the majority.
But that's way later, when the system has already been in place, and when multiple generation of educated people have gotten out of school, and then a proper system may have been in place.
Water, do you remember any of these particular? Can you confirm?
Yeah, no. What he's saying, about the rise of communism makes sense. What he's saying is that the bio-Leninist interpretation of how it got popular is that it's these groups that and the reason that communism is kind of failing when you see that it goes on is because you have people who are in this position of power, but they only got to this position of power because they had to be artificially placed up there. It's like the argument against DEI, but it's talking about actual communism instead of liberals wanting black people to have jobs,
Right. But then that's just nepotism that applies to both Nazis and communists.
I would have to read up more on it to represent it, but yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I still wouldn't be against it. That's just, that's still a point against communists. Obviously, I just don't think that sways my opinion, is what I'm saying, right?
All right, so I think we are about ready to close out this debate.
Yeah, that's enough questions.
Is there any? Do you guys want to close, or what do we?
Yeah,
what
sure. I really appreciate
3 minutes to get a closing.
Well, I think we can do a joint closing statements. We both can speak at the same time.
I think we should do individual ones.
Oh, okay. Right. Then I'm just gonna let you go first then.
Okay. My position is that At the end of this, I understand why you would say that Nazism is worse than communism and why we should view them that way. I disagree. I disagree less than I did before. But I still would say that communism still has just had more impact. If we're talking about specifically on like specific groups, then we could talk about that. But I think largely it still remains about the same as when I entered. But I do understand the argument a lot more now. I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, and I guess for me personally, I understand how you feel. I think what you're focused on was mostly about which one had a greater negative impact, whereas I feel like based upon things, whereas I was going for a more which one had both a massive negative impact and had no counters to it. Like, for instance, that's why I brought up the good things that people who claim to be communists have done. Because I feel like the impact of communists is more than just the negative stuff they've done. They've also done good things, which outweigh it. Whereas Nazis have, for all time, been just negative and have great, immense negative impacts. And they're still technically a threat to this day. You could still, like, there are plenty of people here that are communists that we both can agree with and such, but I understand your opinion is informed by it, and I respect it. I'm really glad this conversation happened, and I really appreciate it.
Alrighty, I wish there could have been a little more screaming, but it was still a good debate overall.
I wanted to do one where I didn't just scream at people the whole time, okay? I can't... You can't, like, it's gonna literally ruin my entire reputation. Like, I've already done that twice already. You got that 2 times out of me. What do you want?
More. But, great debate. I'm glad everybody enjoyed.
Scream at you if you want.
If we want to continue conversation, we can move over to the politics chat. But for this debate, it is over. I really hope you enjoyed that debate. If you'd like to participate in one of these debate nights, come join the server. The link is down in the description, as well as all of our other social medias. But otherwise, like, comment, and subscribe. Don't forget to join that server. That's all I've got for you tonight. See you later.